The worship of the god Apollo was one of the most popular in the Greek world. The oracles of Apollo were the prophecies the god handed down to believers. Apollo was the voice of Zeus, his father, and his oracles were therefore the will of the supreme god of Olympus. The worship of Apollo was a Greek rite, although a large number of foreigners also came in search of predictions. Even the Romans came to venerate this divinity, since there was widespread belief in the oracles. The worship of Apollo was at its peak in Greece in the 4th century BC. Temples erected in honor of the god were everywhere. 3 of the biggest and most important sanctuaries, which for various reasons had some claim to fame, were the sanctuary on the island of Delos in the Cyclades, the one at Delphi in Phocis, and the one at Didymi near the city of Miletus in Ionia, present-day Turkey. Apart from being the god of prophecy, Apollo was also the god of light and the god of the arts, music in particular. Important music competitions were often held at his sanctuaries. The sanctuary on the island of Delos became so important that it carved out a unique place in history. According to an Athenian edict of the 5th century BC, it was prohibited to be born or to die on this island. Yet Delos was not a desert island, for the city had many magnificent colonnaded streets. And judging from these remains, people used to produce, trade, and live there. So how was it possible that birth and death were banned in a place humming with activity as Delos was? When archaeologists started excavating on the nearby desert islet of Rhenea, they found a big necropolis with thousands of bones and burial artifacts, and the answer to their question. It was there that the people of Delos buried their dead, and where island women gave birth. No one was allowed to be born or die on Delos because the island was considered sacred. It was here, according to legend, that Apollo was born. Not much of the temple to Apollo remains today, but when it was built, it measured 100 by 46 feet. It also had a monumental statue of the god in front that was 26 feet high, higher than the temple itself. Both peasants and monarchs would come before Apollo to see what life had in store for them, a harvest or an imminent war. However, the god could not influence fate, which to the Greeks was already written and inevitable, even for Zeus. To pay homage to Apollo, the Gaea, a festival which included athletic competitions and horse races, was held every 5 years all around the sanctuary. Music contests, including performances by numerous Greek singers, would have been a part of this as well. Here you could take lessons from elderly musicians devoted to Apollo. You could learn to play the lyre, learn the metrics of verses. You could also learn how to compose melodies and adapt them to the rhythm of poetry. If you wanted, you could compete with the great winners of the Delian singing contests. In another part of the sanctuary, archaeologists found a concave floor bordered by pavement and surrounded by the walls of an unusually long and narrow temple. When they unearthed this strange building, they called it the Temple of the Bulls, due to the striking metapiece it contained. But its purpose was still a mystery to them. The concave shape of the floor and the length of the temple led scholars to believe the building had been erected to house a great trophy, a ship, or a 165 feet long war trireme. Archaeologists reached that conclusion because for a long time Delos had been the center of the Delian League, a powerful naval alliance formed by the most important Greek cities. Besides, the concave floor would fit the hull of a ship perfectly. The Greek city-states had formed a league to defend its members from the Persian Empire, a powerful and menacing enemy they all feared. Since they wanted to minimize internal rivalries, they chose a neutral place as the seat of their alliance that could be guarantor for all city-states, open to all Greeks at all times. The sacred island of Delos was just right. For a long time, the League's treasure was kept here. Delos was also famous in ancient times for its thriving slave market and its favorable trade position at the center of the main sea lanes. For the tiniest of islands, known originally only for its divinity worship, Delos became a place of grand importance in the Western world. On the eastern side of the Aegean Sea, archaeologists excavating near the sanctuary at Didymi in Ionia, now Turkey, found the remains of two separate temples. The first was imposing and mostly still standing, while the second had only the foundation remaining, and it was turned 30 degrees more toward the north than the first. Historical accounts provided archaeologists with clues as to why. The first temple was erected much earlier, during the 6th century BC, and was later destroyed by the Persians in the war against the Greeks. Alexander the Great, king of Macedonia, and the first king to be called the Great, reconquered the nearby city of Miletus and had a sanctuary built in the same spot in honor of Apollo. Since he did nothing on a small scale, he wanted it to be enormous. And enormous it was. Picture yourself walking up the temple's front stairway, and you'll get a good idea of the building's mammoth size. After the Temple of Artemis at Ephesus and the Heraion at Samos, the Temple of Apollo at Didymi is the third largest building ever erected in the Greek world. Its columns, whose imposing structure and decoration can be appreciated to this day, were nearly 66 feet high and richly adorned. The colonnade that was erected at the top of the stairway had 3 entrances, 2 small ones on the sides, and a big one in the middle that was always open. Although it was the most inviting entrance, it was prohibited to use it. Only priests could enter this room, called a vestibule. From here, the female prophets of Apollo, in a trance, would utter their responses with incomprehensible words that only the priests could translate. The rest of the crowd of worshippers could use either of the small side entrances to see the rest of the sanctuary. Both led to the same place. After walking through one of the small entrances, one would descend to the ground floor. At the end of a long corridor, you would finally reach the main area of the sanctuary of Didymi, a large laurel grove that grew out of the bare earth and contained a sacred spring. The sanctuary had no roof, so it was bathed in sunlight. In the background, there was a small temple called a naiskos in Greek that contained the statue of Apollo. The god made ambiguous predictions through a medium that was either a priest or a prophetess. Responses were interpreted, and worshippers understood the oracle only after an event had occurred. In this way, the god never made a mistake. According to legend, after the temple of Didymi was rebuilt, the water of the sacred spring, which had dried up because of the plundering and burning by the Persians, started flowing again. The sacred spring and the laurel grove explained the unusual architecture of the impressive building that was mostly roofless and erected on 2 levels with 2 stairways, one to go up and the other to go down. Most of the people would wait outside the temple and try to understand the words interpreted by the priests. Success is achieved only by those who wander around and are able to wait. Worshippers could set off on the sacred road with this knowledge, comforted by the fact that with Apollo's words, they could not fail. The words encouraged them and filled them with self-confidence, making them surer of their own strength. Along the sacred road that led to and from the sanctuary, one would find musicians, inspired by the spiritual nature of the location, who would play their lyres and recite poetry. Almost all singers in ancient times were poets, and most used the lyre to accompany their verses. This instrument was made from tortoiseshell, which formed the resonant body. It had 2 horns and a crossbar on which chords were strung and plucked by a plectrum. In those days, musicians not only had to be good players, they had to be healthy and good-looking as well. It is said that the great Homer was not allowed to take part in a singing contest because he was blind. It was on the Greek mainland where the most renowned center for prophecy in the ancient world was located, the sanctuary of Apollo at Delphi. In early digs, archaeologists excavating at deep layers of the ground found only votive statuary with female guys. Shallower layers contained artifacts from a more recent period, mostly votive statuary, clearly with male appearance. Why was there such a big difference? Once again, legend provided scholars with a key for interpreting this. It is said that Gaea, the goddess of the earth, was venerated in an earlier period at Delphi, and that the serpent Python guarded her sanctuary. According to myth, at a certain point Apollo grew tired of the small island of Delos where he was born, and roamed Greece in search of a suitable place to build a temple worthy of his stature. When he arrived at Delphi, he decided to erect his temple there, but had to take on the serpent Python that was the guardian. Apollo slayed it with his arrows, which is why he is often referred to as Pythian. So once again, legend has been confirmed by archaeology. The votive statues of Gaea, antiquity of the earlier period, demonstrate the existence of a temple dedicated to her, while the votive statues of Apollo prove the change in worship that occurred in the later period, and explains why they were found closer to the surface. Once Apollo settled at Delphi in place of Gaea, he started handing out oracles from his temple. But where and how did the god transmit his mysterious messages to worshippers? Archaeologists found an underground passage under this terrace that housed the temple of Apollo at Delphi. The tunnel led to a hollow with crevices and a rock. Scholars compared this discovery with ancient historical sources and discovered how the rite was performed. After purifying themselves with water from the Castalian spring, Apollo's priestesses, called Pythians, descended into the basement cell. There they were surrounded by intoxicating fumes emanating from a crevice in a rock. Under the psychotropic effect of the fumes, the Pythians uttered mysterious words that the priests translated into oracles, either in prose or verse form. Although this practice might amuse us today, in ancient times even the fate of a kingdom was entrusted to the oracles. A king might decide whether or not to attack, wage war, make peace, fight back, or surrender, based on their predictions. By giving vague answers that could be interpreted in a number of ways, persuading people to act or wait, Apollo's priests ended up influencing the politics of the time. And since they had power, they could be bribed. To have a well-wishing oracle who could help obtain consensus from the people, monarchs and politicians did not mind paying the priests. Greeks believed in the inevitability of fate, and sometimes would ask the Delphic oracle for confirmation of a prophecy heard elsewhere. Knowing that through the priests Apollo could be less ambiguous and give more details about one's future, it would behoove one to make a generous offering so the priests would be more attentive. The oracle did not cure souls nor prepare anyone for the afterlife, but simply handed out predictions that could be translated into real advantages in everyday life. If you offered Apollo a big animal, for example, he might predict you could be successful as a musician. The ancient sacred road that leads to the sanctuary, crammed today with tourists wanting to see the archaeological site, was lined in ancient times with statues and small temples. They were the treasures of Delphi that Greek writer Pausanias from the 2nd century AD described with an abundance of detail. This treasure of the Athenians is the best preserved one. But there were many, all containing valuables and artworks, most of which were carried off over the centuries and never found again. Yet Delphi never fails to amaze. Gold, bronze, and ivory votive objects, and a magnificent sphinx, perhaps the city's most beautiful statue, have been unearthed there. These superb objects, however, were not mentioned in Pausanias's meticulous book entitled Description of Greece. Scholars found the answer to this mystery by examining the disasters that occurred in the area, like earthquakes and the many landslides on the hills at Delphi. Had the gifts offered to Apollo been damaged in the disasters, they could no longer be displayed. That's why people were forced to bury them as offerings inside the sanctuary. So the many masterpieces, already under the ground during Pausanias's time, can now be admired at the local museum. Another beautiful construction not mentioned by Pausanias is this tholos, a splendid circular building. The building had a diameter of approximately 30 feet and was 23 feet high. It wasn't very big, but with its 20 columns outside and 10 inside, it expressed the Greeks' tendency to seek formal perfection. The Tholos was an unusual building in classical Greece, and the one at Delphi stood at the top of its class. To worshippers, their images of the power and majesty of the gods was embodied in the beauty of this building. Besides being a place of worship, Delphi also played host to the Pythian Games, one of the 4 great athletic and artistic festivals of ancient Greece. Chariot races were one of the highlights of the festival, as represented by this bronze statue. Drama and music competitions were also held at the festival in this theater, situated beside the Temple of Apollo. If we listen closely, we might hear one of the oracle's predictions calling out to us. Only those who have the courage to face the fiercest battles will receive the greatest rewards. The battles at the Pythian Games included competition in wrestling, running, and throwing, and the event was held every 4 years between the Olympic Games. Winners were awarded crowns of laurel wreaths, the plant worn by Apollo himself, to whom the games were dedicated. Apollo was known for his wisdom and sense of justice. He was the patron of archery and bows and showed great courage even as a child. But he was also the patron of music and the arts, and is often depicted with a lyre. His music was indeed music from the gods, music that seems to echo even today at this majestic site. According to myth, Zeus, the father of Apollo, released 2 eagles from opposite ends of the earth to discover the exact center of the world. They met at Delphi. To the Greeks, this was the navel of the earth, their center of the world. And Apollo was the brilliant god, the god of light and truth, the paragon of male beauty who embodied all the values they held dear, and who could guide them through their lives. It was to Apollo that the Greeks entrusted their future.